Vimy Ridge didn't end the war. It took another year. The war didn't end until the day we now celebrate as Remembrance Day, November 11th, 1918. And after the war, France said, Canada, you can have Vimy Ridge for a memorial. You should have it, since so many Canadians died there. And it took us 17 years to build the most beautiful war monument in the world, made of carved marble. Our best sculptors were involved. If you go to the Western Front, which I hope you will, it's an unforgettable experience. The other war monuments on the front have British lions, and they have cannons, and they're very warlike. Canada's monument has a weeping mother, weeping for her lost sons. And on the monument are the names of 11,000 men for whom nothing was ever found, who were obliterated by shells. If any part of you was found, there's a grave. And all around Vimy and all around the Western Front are the graves of young Canadians who died there, excuse me, and were buried there. But it took us 17 years. It was the most expensive cultural public works project the country had ever undertaken. But to show you that the war doesn't solve very much, 2.5 years after the monument was dedicated, guess who's there?
Hitler.
That's right. Why is Hitler there?
Because he's mad.
Yeah. Well, I'll quickly tell you. 2.5 years after the monument was dedicated, Vimy Ridge and all of France are back in German hands. At the end of the war, many Germans felt that they hadn't lost the war, that they'd been sold out by their leaders. And Hitler managed to capitalize on that anger and form his Nazi party and then bring it to power and prove to the world that they were not humiliated. And when he overran France, he made them sign the surrender in the same railway car, in the same forest, where Germany had had to surrender 20-some years before. So we thought Hitler would blow it up. We thought Hitler would blow up our new, beautiful monument. But he didn't. He went there and had his picture taken to show that he wasn't going to blow it up. He admired it. He actually thought it was a beautiful monument. But there was another reason, and that is that Hitler had been there as a German soldier in 1917 on the other side. And he said, I don't blow up war monuments. This is a picture of the young Hitler in his spiky German helmet. But notice the big mustache. Not the ratty little Hitler mustache, but a big mustache. And one of his friends remembered that whenever they had to put on their gas masks when there was a gas attack, Hitler's big mustache would interfere with the seal around the mouth of the gas mask. So one day he just took a razor and he hacked off one side of his mustache and then the other side, leaving only the ratty little toothbrush mustache on the inside. That supposedly is the origin of the Hitler mustache. But that leads me, of course, from our great victory that was carefully planned and executed by Canadians to our greatest defeat of the next war, and how one war simply led to another. And I'll tell you now about the Dieppe Raid. So here's Hitler with his ratty little mustache in Paris, 1940, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower like any tourist, except the difference is he's acting as if he owns it, because, in fact, he does. He now owns all of France. In fact, by the end of 1941, Hitler controls most of Europe. And my mother, who was a nurse in England during this time, said, we thought Hitler was coming any day. And she said, you don't know. Hitler very nearly won the war. Hitler came very close to winning the war. Everything in brown here belongs to Hitler. Everything in sort of light green is neutral. So there's only Britain and Soviet Russia standing up. The Americans have, at this point, have just joined the war, but they haven't sent any forces yet. So, and we're sending supplies from Halifax, but the German U-boats are sinking the boats as fast as they can. Anyone know what U-boats are? Would-be boats? Yes? Submarines. They were submarines. And the Germans had amazing submarines and submarine crews. But look at all of this. This is Hitler's empire that he controls. Now, in June of 1940, when Hitler's troops overran France, there were 350,000 soldiers, British, some Canadian, Australian, and French soldiers, marooned on a beach near a French town called Dunkirk. And the German forces were advancing. They were either going to capture or kill them all. If that had happened, Hitler would have won the war. The war would have been over by June of 1940. on the beaches of Dunkirk. However, what some people call a miracle happened. The clouds moved in, the German Luftwaffe, the aircraft, had trouble strafing and bombing, and from all across the south of England came ships. Ships of all kinds. If you had a pleasure boat, a yacht, a fishing boat, a ferry boat, whatever it was, they said, get in your boats, go across the channel, and pick up as many men as you possibly can. Well, in about a week, they managed to rescue 318,000 men. It was a miracle. To this day, people still wonder why Hitler didn't wipe out the army and win the war. But for some reason, maybe it was God, who knows, someone intervened, excuse me, and this amazing rescue happened at Dunkirk. Now, Winston Churchill, Britain's great wartime prime minister, had only become prime minister a month before Dunkirk. And he had to make a speech and remind the British that a rescue is not a victory. He said, it's wonderful we rescued those men. Everybody was thrilled about it. He said, it's wonderful we rescued the men, but a rescue is not a victory, because he knew that in France, they had left behind the guns, the tanks, the jeeps, the ammunition, everything you need to fight a war now belonged to Hitler. Things were really looking bad for Great Britain. What were they going to do? So Churchill called in his generals and said, what are we going to do? And one man said, we can't attack Hitler, we don't have the material, but maybe we can harass him. Maybe we can harass him and have secret raids on Hitler's empire. Good idea. And so they sent some of their strongest, toughest men up to the Highlands of Scotland for special training. And within about 2 weeks, they called them commandos, a new name. And they had these men blacken their faces, put knives in their boots, strap grenades to their belts, and they snuck across the channel after midnight and they blew up a German facility. Half of them were killed, the rest got back, and the newspapers went crazy. Great commando raid, Hitler furious, black eye for Hitler. Everybody cheered, they thought it was great. So then they planned another raid. They went up to Norway. Hitler never knew where they were going to hit next. Here they are blowing up a fish oil plant in Norway. Hitler got so mad, he said, if any commando who is captured is to be instantly shot. We take no prisoners when they are commandos. He was so angry about this. Now, meanwhile, by the spring of 1942, Hitler has made his biggest mistake, or one of his biggest mistakes, which is that instead of invading England, he decides to invade Russia instead. Because after Dunkirk, he began bombing Britain. And maybe you've all heard of the Battle of Britain, of the Blitz, the bombing of London and so forth. Well, during that time, the men of the Royal Air Force and the Royal Canadian Air Force managed to actually repel the Luftwaffe, drive off the Messerschmitts and the Focke-Wulf fighters. And they actually survived, and Hitler decides, okay, we're not going to invade England, we're going to invade Russia. Meanwhile, in the south of England, in encampments, there are 125,000 Canadians who are in the south of England to defend England in case of invasion from Hitler. And that invasion is now not happening, and the Canadians have nothing to do. So by the spring of 1942, people were saying, why aren't the Canadians doing anything? They're just drilling and practicing and having a good time. Why aren't they fighting? It's becoming a national embarrassment. Why don't they get involved in some of these raids? These raids are pretty effective. Why not involve the Canadians in some of those? Now, this is my friend Fred Engelbrecht, one of the many Dieppe veterans I spoke to for this book. And these are pictures from his album, he with some of his buddies. And these are the tents they lived in the south of England. Now, the man in charge of planning these raids was named Lord Louis Mountbatten. And he was a cousin of the king. And he was kind of a hero. He was young to be an admiral. He was very handsome. And he was of the royal family. And so he said, look, maybe we could send 500 men across the channel to the port town of Dieppe, and there's an important radar station on the cliffs outside of town. Maybe they could blow up the radar station. But then somebody said, well, maybe we could make it a bigger raid and involve some of the Canadians, and we could try and seize the whole town. How about that? So Dieppe went from being a raid of 500 men to a raid of 5,000 men. 6,000 actually, 5,000 of them Canadian. Now everybody knew about Dieppe because in peacetime it was a popular vacation town. It had a casino and a beach and a golf course, and people would go across the channel there at peacetime. So everybody knew about Dieppe. So the admirals and the generals, the British High Command, start planning for this kind of super raid. Another reason for the super raid was that Joseph Stalin, who was the leader of Soviet Russia, was putting real pressure on the British, pressure on Churchill, saying, you must attack France to take some of the heat off us. Our citizens are dying by the thousands. If you attack France, Hitler will have to take some forces away from Russia, and that'll give us a bit of a break. So there was a lot of pressure to make Dieppe a successful attack. Now, General Montgomery was one of the planners, and his nickname was Monty. Maybe you've heard of the full Monty? Well, that comes from General Montgomery. And later, he tried to pretend that he wasn't part of the planning and that there were too many people, and there were far too many people involved in planning the Dieppe Raid, and that's why it went so wrong.